this moment and change forever. In my name, Hallelujah.
Okay, and with that, we'll waken up Eli Lowe. He'll talk about power and humility.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm glad everyone can make it out on this beautiful day. I love a good storm myself, so it's I woke up and was kind of fascinated by the wind and the rain. I actually just spent maybe 10 minutes staring out the window, absorbing it and appreciating the strength of God's creation. But so my topic today, power and humility. I want to say something about kind of these 2-word titles, because when I was on STF, we would read the 12 talks by True Parents. Father gave these talks a lot in the 80s, I think 70s, 80s. Often it was to the MFT teams. So they were very practical. And I remember we read them a lot on STF, and it was kind of like we probably read through the 12 talks 5 times, 10 times. I'm not sure, but didn't really absorb it most of the time because you're kind of groggy and you just wake up and you're reading Hunduke and trying to get your mind to catch up with your body, or vice versa. But sometimes you just would really be able to absorb it. And they were really kind of, Father spoke it was more like a Hunduke where he was just kind of casually talking to people, except it actually was a speech. So he had kind of a clear beginning and an end, and he kind of had a point he was making. And it was usually a very practical point and a very kind of clear point in the sense that, he just wanted to take kind of one aspect of our life of faith and give some guidance and give some kind of practical guidance on how to think about it and how to approach it. So in that, there was a couple speeches that were just 2-word titles, like Faith and Reality, Challenge and Victory. And I always thought those were kind of nice titles, kind of clear titles. And they were kind of in the spirit of the message, where it was just, something simple to something practical to kind of help us understand our faith. So I try to follow that sometimes, though I'm not as proud of this title. I don't think this is a good title, so to speak, more because it's a bit of a paradox, right? It's about, the talk is kind of about, people striving for power, but also how they need to be, how humility is kind of required in order to really be influential. And I'll kind of jump into it. The main reason this came up is, this is my second service in a row. And if I can confess a little bit, it's hard for me to actually prepare 2 services in a row. And even that confession makes me feel very guilty, because I recognize that shouldn't be the case. And usually this responsibility of being kind of a pastor or lecturer, you should kind of be ready to give, lots of services in a row, right? I'd say most people are giving a service almost every Sunday, or 3 out of 4 Sundays. So, admitting to myself that having to do a second service in a row is a challenge does make me feel a little guilty. And it makes me feel guilty because I recognize that it really isn't the way I should be, right? It's kind of the other thing about doing this is, I don't want to come up and just talk about anything, right? I really want the service to be something that inspires people, that maybe gives people inspiration, gives them some good motivation, some hope in the providence in the future. So what happens when I kind of get to this stage is I become a little more, I don't want to say honest, but a little bit more kind of saying more what I'm really thinking, or things that are more connected to my day-to-day struggles, right? And, I used to be a really big oversharer, in the sense that when I was kind of a teenager and when I was kind of going to college, I would almost tell anybody everything. And I think part of it was a reaction to kind of, when I was younger, trying to hide my faith. And so I got to the point, I remember in college where someone would be like, why don't you drink? And my first answer just instinctively was, oh, because I'm in a cult. I'm like, really? What kind of cult? It's like, well, you know, kind of the typical kind of cult stereotypes, mass marriage and and you know, weird ceremonies and worshiping, you know, a Korean guy as the Messiah. Like that was just kind of too honest. And as I've gotten older, I've realized, you know, that's not really a good strategy. You don't want to be too honest with people. I think marriage was one of the first really kind of clear experiences where you want to, there's a balance, right? You want people to, there's certain things you don't share right away, and you don't just tell everyone everything, right? Because you want people to be happy. You want people to be inspired. You want people to feel something special, right? When they come to service, when they come here, you're not just a person here, right? You kind of represent a position. You represent a responsibility. And so that's what I mean, where already it's kind of confessing and admitting to myself that it's difficult to prepare service really highlights that difference kind of between the position and the person, right? Because I really feel, you know, ideally, you know, the position of the national leader, but actually the position of anyone who stands up here is you're representing Heavenly Parent, you're representing true parents, you're kind of in the position of, even going back, it's like the position of Moses leading the Israelites, right, through the desert, or Joshua leading the Israelites into Canaan. And ideally, the person who is in that position should be very close to God, right? Should be the person who's the closest to God and, you know, the most loving and the most, you know, committed to the providence and has the most faith. And so, you know, this is kind of the position, right? And then this is kind of the person up here representing the position. And I feel that very strongly at times. And yeah, it's something that in that context, I think it's something that a lot of our, you know, brothers and sisters that do mission, they feel very strongly. You know, I think it's, you know, people have this heart to help and serve and take on mission, but it very much is, you know, I think they recognize, right, that they're taking on a responsibility, but I don't want to use the words not worthy, but I think that's, you know, that's kind of an understanding, right? They want to do God's will, they want to help God's will, but they can see their shortcomings. And I really do think that most of our brothers and sisters around the world, you know, even our national leaders, you know, the missionaries, people that are responsible, have any kind of responsibility, I think that's a very common challenge, right? And I think it's also a common challenge, you know, among other religious faiths, pastors, priests. You know, I think a lot of them, they really have this motivation to inspire people, to help people, but they recognize where they're falling short. And it's kind of a constant, you know, it's kind of a constant battle there, right? You want to represent the position, but you also know that you're not the position, right? You're kind of still struggling to figure out how to be the ideal there, right? So, so yeah, the goal is to really inspire. The position is meant to inspire, to give hope, to give motivation. But, you know, the Bible almost makes it seem very easy, right? I'm thinking of when the Jews were expecting a Messiah, right? It was Elijah will come and turn the hearts of the children to the fathers and the hearts of the fathers to the children. It almost feels like it's going to be this instant change, right? Elijah pops down from the clouds and is like, hey, everyone, listen up. You've been doing everything wrong. Let's love each other. Let's take care of each other. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a great idea. Jesus comes by right after him, and then the world is perfect, right? And even Christians, they've kind of inherited this instant salvation way of thinking about the last days, right? It's Jesus pops down on the clouds. All the good people go, hooray. All the bad people go, oh, crap. And then there's just a split, and then everyone lives happily ever after, right? While the rest, we don't think too hard about what happens to them. And maybe there's this kind of testing period in between where people can try to cross the line, right? And that's kind of the Christian view. of salvation and the last days. But the truth is, it's really slow, right? And it's really, really slow. And I remember once I was really inspired when I was 12 after coming back from Korea. And I told my dad, like, yeah, me and all my friends will each, restore a state, and then America will be restored, and then the world will be restored, right? And I remember even, testimonies of a lot of the first generation members. They're like, yeah, the kingdom of heaven will come, and, it'll come in like 40 days or next week, right? Like, so the reality is that it's actually so slow to change the hearts and minds of people, right? It's really a process. And that expression I've always that expression always sticks with me, because I think it's very deep, the prophecy of Elijah coming, that he'll change the hearts of the children to the fathers, and the fathers to the children. And putting aside the fact that it's a little patriarchal, let's include mothers and daughters. But the point being that, that's the struggle. That's where it's the hearts of people where the battle happens, right? And it's this changing the hearts of people towards their parents and towards their heavenly parents, and also changing, the hearts of people to understand their children, right? To understand other children. So, it's not easy. And I think what happens is any kind of responsibility is a type of power. Any type of power comes with responsibility, right? And because of how often power is misused, power has a very negative connotation, right? But the reality is, whenever we have responsibility for people, that's also a type of influence. It's a type of power. And, I think it's crucial that there's a kind of constant understanding of this gap, right, between the responsibility we have and our ability to kind of fully fulfill that responsibility. I think the minute people start forgetting that gap, then it's very easy then to abuse their power and abuse their influence. And I think, so I think where this is really obvious, and one of the reasons that I think it's important to think about this a little more, is because of, we see it in politics, right? And we had an Irish election yesterday. I believe it was yesterday. And the results are kind of coming in. And it's, politics, those who know me know that I really love politics, especially US politics, although Colin's really working on getting me interested in Irish politics. It might take 5 or 10 more years, but don't give up on it. But I had a canvasser come around yesterday. Yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. And, I was kind of watching the kids, and I was in the middle of doing something, but he was for the Green Party and giving me a few lines. And I kind of wanted to get into it with him. I kind of want to start, Green Party. Okay. So you believe, we need to build nuclear plants around Ireland and invest all our extra money in nuclear plants in Africa. And, because it's an emergency. Anyway, sorry, I won't go into it, but it was there was that urge to kind of challenge him and fight with him about it. But, and other people know I kind of joke about wanting to be president of the United States. But the truth is, it's a terrible job, right? It really is a terrible job, because the minute you become the president of the United States, literally a third of the country hates your guts. Doesn't matter. They just hate your guts. Doesn't matter which party you're with. Doesn't matter anything you said. You are hated by a third of the country. And then another third of the country worships you as if you're like the Messiah. And then there's a third in the middle, which is kind of reasonable, that are kind of like, I don't really care, right? But the reason for that hatred, and the reason for that kind of complete love and adoration, is actually rarely the person. It's the position, right? It's the expectation of that position, and the influence you have, and the expectation of how much you can change, right? And I noticed this very clearly when Obama became president, for example, right? It was almost exactly the same as when Bush became president. right? When Clinton was president, and even when Trump became president, it's almost like it really doesn't matter. People hate you and they love you, or they don't care, right? But it's not the person, right? The person is very limited in what they can do. The person, there's checks and balances. There's only a few things they can do. They can make a lot of change, but they're not going to fix healthcare, right? They're not going to solve all the problems of the world, because those problems are difficult and they take time and they're very, very hard to solve, and not one person can solve them. But I think politics is really the epitome of the expression, those who want power don't deserve it, and those who deserve power don't want it. And so you have this very ironic situation where power attracts the people who aren't good at it, right? And I felt this actually even in the big company I was working for. It very much started to become that way, because there was so much influence and power within the company that it would attract a certain type of people into those positions. And then other people that didn't care about power just didn't want to be on those teams. They didn't want to compete. They didn't want to be involved. And so they just started leaving. And you have kind of a reinforcing cycle where those type of people attract other type of people who want to be in that kind of environment, right? And it becomes less about making the right decisions. It becomes less about solving problems and more about the power itself and the position itself, right? So I think, and it just reminds me that something my dad said once that it always stuck with me, because I thought he was being way too optimistic. But he said eventually only like genuine religious people, right? People who aren't going to have scandals and who people know they can trust are going to be able to become politicians, right? He gets so angry whenever there was a scandal, whenever he was listening to politicians talk. He'd be like, eventually it's just going to be, he was like, just our church members, because they're the ones who, have this concept of really living for the sake of others, or balancing the greater good with the individual purpose, because they're driven by the motivation to do God's will. But I think that eventually that is what will have to happen, right? Genuine people will be recognized as being the ones who people want to follow and want to listen to. And in that way, they'll start to have influence and power. But another example of this, as I was reading in the papers, some of the things the Irish politicians were saying, right? And one of the things that makes it difficult for me to be really involved in Irish politics is I feel like every party is basically the same. And so they're just arguing over who should be in charge. Like the arguments aren't about should we raise taxes and take care of people better, because everyone wants to do that. It's more about, no, I deserve to do it because I'll do that better, right? And so some of the conversations, some of the things I read that they're saying about each other is really just, to me, very transparently like, I want to be prime minister and I don't think this guy should be prime minister. Like that's how I'm interpreting what they're saying. So yeah, it's to kind of tie this back though to the main point that you might be asking, am I making a main point? Is that this responsibility and this difference between kind of the responsibility we have and the position we have and our own shortcomings, I think is something we have to recognize on every level, right? It's not about just looking at the big, powerful people and being like, they really should do better, or they should be better. It's about like, whenever we have influence, right? And we have it a lot more than we think. And it's something like when you become a parent, suddenly you're responsible for a whole nother person and a whole nother life, right? If Zach turns 12 and he's like a psycho kid that curses at his teachers and beats up everyone else in the class and is a big bully, that's my fault, right? There's no one else to blame. I'm fully responsible for the type of child he becomes. Vicky is half responsible as well. So, but the point is, it's not like I could just blame her for that. I'm pretty sure that would be also my fault, right? So and that's kind of example of like, we have influence and power and this responsibility on many, many levels. You know, there's times when we're just in a position where we can give advice to a friend. And this is something I went through a lot when I was a teenager, because, you know, when you're a teenager, everyone's going through something, you yourself, but so are all your friends. And so you try to give advice to them, or you try to help them out, and it just never works. Like it's really frustrating, right? And you know, in the beginning, I was like, oh yeah, I'm helping him out, I'm giving him good advice, and then after a few years, you're like, no, I'm not. Like, I don't even know why I'm saying anything right now, right? It's just so it's a learning process, and it's a growing process. But I think it's a healthy one and an important one to recognize. And I think the other part of that is this, to kind of connect it a little bit to my last service, I was talking about, you know, the purpose of the whole and the purpose of the individual. And I was kind of saying in the context of the church mission, right, and contributing to the providence and really trying to support what's happening in Korea. But I think it's also true on this kind of level of politics and local community. And, you know, the older we get, the more we start to become involved in things outside our own families and our own kind of day-to-day, like finding a job, going to school. And so that's why I was joking earlier that Colum could probably wear me down, because I'm becoming more and more a part of a community. Like, my kid's going to school, and then, you know, I got to go in and talk to the teacher, and there's events in the village, right? And all things that actually I do care about and I do want to be involved in. But I think the other part of that is, you know, what True Parents have always been doing, and what True Mother was doing specifically in this time in Korea, is why is she trying to bring politicians in, right? Why is she bringing them all together? Why is she kind of making that such a priority? And I think it's connected to this point. It's, you know, these former leaders have a lot of power and influence. They have this position, and the question is, do they recognize the kind of gap between the position and what they're doing, right? And I think one way that makes it more visible and more possible for them to see that is to meet other politicians with different struggles, with different, you know, people that they don't feel are just trying to come after them to gain something from them, but people who are in similar positions to them, right? And people who they can learn from and start to see different perspectives and start to realize where they might be able to have a positive effect, right? Because I think if Mother just goes directly to politicians and like, oh, well, she's coming to me because I'm a politician, right? But I think if politicians are meeting together and talking to each other, there's this kind of deeper understanding, right? And especially if the theme is kind of trying to help people to be more God-centered, right? Trying to push the political view to be something that's not just about power, but about actually addressing problems and trying to solve them, then I think that it will be a slow process, right? It's not that all these politicians are going to go to Korea and Jesus will come down from the clouds and tell them to follow True Parents, right? It's never a snap of your fingers and suddenly everyone's doing God's will. But it's a slow process, right? A process to help them recognize there's more they can do, or there's more they can be part of, right? So I really am inspired by our movement's ability to hold the event we held, right? And I don't know if everyone has had a chance to listen to Enda Kenny's speech, but it was a good speech. It was actually quite a kind of defense of the EU and its real underlining values. And, you know, it was kind of a solid defense of the strength and the beauty of the European Union. And the other thing is, because he's now gone to Korea, again, that puts a lot of responsibility on our shoulders, right? It puts a lot of, again, there's this position that we have to respect and we have to understand. And even though our own abilities might fall a little short, we have to bridge that gap somehow, right? We have to understand what we can do, and it's a process. It's a growing process. But I think the last point I want to make on this is if you think of kind of from the providential viewpoint, true parents had kind of the ultimate power, right? And yet something that always struck me, people looking out, again, it's this idea, if someone has power, then already people hate you, right? They hate the position, they hate the declaration, right? So when true parents declared himself the Messiah, then of course people hate him, and they can accuse him of being arrogant, and they can accuse mother of being arrogant. But the truth is, in Father's actual day-to-day life, he was a very, very humble man, right? And I think the biggest signs of that was when Father really prayed. He prayed as if no one else was in the room, and he was just talking directly to God. And they're some of the kind of most humblest prayers I've heard, right? And it's another reason that really enforces for me that Father had power and responsibility and influence, but he didn't really want it, right? He wasn't in it for the power or the influence. And I think that's very obvious in the type of person he was and the type of actions he did, right? Like he was very comfortable just going to South America and kind of living in a primitive tribe for 3 or 4 weeks and just, helping them with their communal chores and stuff, right? He didn't go there and was like, everyone should worship me, right? So I think, father and mother are kind of always this ultimate example. But even when I think about when Father accepted the mission, right, to take on Jesus's mission, it was like, I really don't want to do this. I really don't want to be the Messiah, because it's the position, but I respect the position. I understand the position has to be done. Like I understand the value that has, but it's not for my personal gain or personal kind of enjoyment, right? It's really the understanding of the responsibility, and in the end, I think that's why Father accepted it. So yeah, I think. So the conclusion is that we actually do have power and influence, right? In many different ways. And as we get older, that always increases. As we have more younger people who look up to us, not just our own children, but even other younger people, because we're older than them. They are interested in our stories and our life. And I think, if we feel like we're not up to that responsibility or that task, that's very normal, right? And in fact, in a way, it's probably very healthy that we recognize the difference between the responsibilities we have and our own kind of shortcomings and capabilities. Because I think that knowledge motivates us to bridge the gap and to come closer, right? So, so that was kind of my election service, let's call it. I'm kind of interested to see how the Irish election plays out, because I think it's not yet finalized, or it's kind of like a 3-way tie from what I can see. So yeah, we're part of this country and the politics matters. So let's also pray for the politicians. Let's pray that God's will can be done over the course of the next kind of few weeks or so. And that will be kind of my closing thoughts. If everyone could join me in a prayer. Sarang Manashin Hanul Bumunim. Thank you for all the brothers and sisters gathered here today, those who can watch from home or who might watch later, and all the brothers and sisters throughout Ireland and the world, whatever they're doing and however they're contributing to your providence. We know that our true parents have come to this world and have really fought every day of their lives to improve the lives of every one of your children. We know that it's not only a spiritual battle, but really a physical battle, a battle for us to really be the best people we can be, to set example to all the people who know us, and to really support true parents and are also the many brothers and sisters throughout the world who devote, their full time to this mission and to this responsibility. So pray we can always be humble and grateful for all that we have, that we can be a part of this special time in history. And we pray that the leaders of the world can also start to realize the value of being part of an ideal family, a global family under God. I know it's not something they often think about, depending on kind of their culture, their background, their life experiences. Pray that gradually, step by step, everyone can really see the value in recognizing that we are all children of the same parent. And that realization, I truly believe, can change the world, can help end so much of the suffering and confusion, misunderstanding that we see, and can really bring the world together. So I pray now we can go down and enjoy our lunch together, and pray that we can really live each day grateful for the lives we have, but live each day striving to that ideal, that end goal, the kingdom of heaven on earth. That has taken so long to build and will probably take a bit longer. But in our lives, we can really contribute, we can really do our part. So we thank you and report these things in our names. In the name of Young Yil and Vicky Lowe, Blessed Central Family. Achu. Okay, thank you. I'd like to invite Daniel back up. Please service.
Thanks, Eli. I really like the point about people in power. Sometimes people hate you just because of the position. I know